Career as a Manager, author Lee Iacocca. Subtitles by freebooksummary. Career as a Manager, author Lee Iacocca. Introduction to Spoke is the story of the realization of the great American dream from the son of an Italian immigrant to the president of a world-renowned company. Lee Iacocca, the author of The Management Career, was president of Ford and Chrysler. People's rumor attributed to him even the intention to run for president of the United States. But his path was not smooth at all now. Looking back, I simply cannot imagine how I survived those years. My life then was so irrational and unstable that I began to write down every step I took. My wife never tired of telling me, keep track of everything that happens. Someday you'll have the desire to write a book. Career Manager reads like a fascinating industrial, sometimes even adventurous novel, an edgy novel of life in the auto industry. According to CBS, the history of creation and production of cars of legendary brands, famous names of businessmen, industrialists, presidents, pictures of prosperity and crisis of America of the 20th century. The book is also called a textbook on crisis management. The most curious thing that can be found in this autobiographical book is the answer to the question of what character traits are inherent in a successful manager, what lessons he has learned during his long career, the foundations laid in childhood and adolescence, the knowledge and skills acquired during his studies, the leadership skills he learned at Ford and Chrysler. There are thousands of narrow side paths as you go through life, but the really wide forks that determine the choice of the way forward are very rare. The moment of critical challenge, the moment of truth, when something useful is born out of adversity. There are times when everything appears in such a gloomy light that you want to grab fate by the scruff of the neck and shake it hard. I was choking on anger, and I had to make a choice: either turn that anger against myself with the most disastrous consequences, or mobilize some of the energy generated by anger and try to do something productive. Chapter 1. Family. In Lee Iacocca's family, children were expected to play an important role and to do every job well. No activity in the home was to be perceived as too difficult or too unpleasant. Lee himself started working from the age of 10. The Great Depression made him a materialist. Prestigious degrees ever interested him. He chased the dollar. Don't bullshit me with theory. By the time I turn 25, I intend to earn $10,000 a year, and then I want to become a millionaire. Regardless of his financial situation, the memories of the crisis never left him. Even when he was in the clan of the working rich, he placed most of his money only in very safe assets. Somewhere in the back of his mind still nested the fear that lightning would strike again, and the family would have to live in hunger. Lee Iacocca's father believed that solvency is an essential characteristic of an honest and reliable entrepreneur, taught that they should never spend more money and they earned, that credit promises trouble. In this respect, he was ahead of his time. He foresaw that buying goods in installments, debts, or taking credit against property would undermine people's sense of responsibility for keeping monetary obligations, that consumers would be in trouble if they began to think of those little plastic credit cards as real money in a bank account. Dad may have had many other things to do, but he always had time for his children. Dad always remained optimistic. Have patience, he would tell me when things presented themselves in a gloomy light. The sun must rise again. It always does. Chapter 2. The years of study. Lee's diligence in his studies was influenced by his parents' demanding nature. Typical of immigrant families was their son's duty to make the most of the opportunities they themselves were denied, and he was therefore obliged to study harder than anyone else. The father was outraged by his son's 12th place among the 900 graduates of the school. Why aren't you in first place? The most important thing Lee Iacocca felt he learned in school was how to socialize with people. His teacher had the students write a 500-word essay on a given topic each week, and by the end of the school year, the students had learned to put their thoughts on paper. After a well-successful improvised speech class, Lee was placed in a debate club. This is where he learned public speaking and how to speak in front of an audience. It was not enough to remain just a good student. A lot of time he was engaged in extracurricular activities. In the 9th grade, he ran for the position of chairman of the school's student council, winning by an overwhelming majority of votes. As soon as I was elected, I immediately lost contact with my constituents. I thought that I was a head above the other kids, so I started to behave like a snob. I stopped greeting students and maintaining friendly relations. As a result, the next semester I was defeated in the elections. This was a good lesson for me in understanding what leadership means. After a long illness, the young man had to give up active sports, but began to play chess, bridge and especially poker. A clever game that allows you to learn when to take advantage, when to pass, and when to bluff. This art came in especially handy later in difficult union negotiations. While in bed, Lee's main occupation was books. He read like an obsessive reader of anything he could get his hands on. By the time he entered college, he had a solid background in general education, reading, writing, public speaking. With those skills, he could go far. But to succeed in education, business and everything else, knowledge alone is not enough. The most important thing is to be able to concentrate and use your time wisely. When I went to university, I already knew how to focus and work hard without letting myself get distracted. I told myself, for the next 3 hours, I will work as hard as I can, and only after 3 hours I will leave this case and go to the movies. After graduation, we worked hard all week, but tried to free up weekends for family and vacations. Except for emergencies, he never worked on a weekend. It amazes me how many people fail to strictly follow their own daily routines. I worked so hard last year that I didn't even use my vacation time. Nothing to be proud of here at all. I always wanted to say, "What a fool you are. Are you trying to convince me that you can be responsible for an $80 million facility when you can't take 2 weeks out of the year to go somewhere with your family? To use one's time wisely, one must realize what is most important and then give oneself entirely to its fulfillment. If one does not acquire this rational thinking early in life, it is not feasible later on. A formal training course can provide a lot of knowledge, but a number of vital skills a person must develop on his own." Iacocca set himself the goal of achieving an average grade point average of 3.5 in order to graduate with honors. In addition to engineering and economics, Lee studied psychology and psychopathology for 4 years at Lehigh University. He states that these subjects were probably the most valuable of all university disciplines. Their main content was the fundamentals of human behavior, so important to becoming a manager. Chapter 3. The Ford Company. First steps. Iacocca really wanted to work at Ford, but not as a designer. He was attracted to the place where the real business was done. In marketing, in sales, he liked to work with people more than with machines. It is believed that a good salesman must be born. You cannot develop the necessary qualities yourself, but Lee had no natural talent. The first year or two he kept himself to formal, even pompous, but over time he gained some experience and began to feel more confident. Mastering the art of trading takes time and effort. You need to practice this art over and over again until it becomes your second nature. Not all young people realize this. Seeing a successful businessman in front of them, they do not think about how many mistakes he made in his youth. Having mastered the factual side of the business, Lee began to learn how to present it to customers. Over time, dealers began to heed his advice. Most salespeople are successful in the preliminary stages of the sales process, and in the final stage, they are so afraid of a customer's refusal to buy a car that they often let them actually leave the showroom without making a purchase. They are simply unable to get their act together and firmly say, "Put your signature here." You should never speak in front of a clientele without rehearsing what you intend to say, as well as what you intend to demonstrate. If a customer comes into your salon, give him your best attention, have a conversation with him, give him the information he needs. He doesn't always know exactly what he wants. Some delicate help is needed. Treating customers properly requires knowledge, time, and patience. After all, if salespeople do not possess these qualities, they should look for another profession. There was no longer any doubt that he had done the right thing in leaving the engineering profession. Here, in sales, the main action was happening, and Lee liked being at the center of it. Management lessons. One of the leaders of the new generation of managers, who brought to the company Ford financial accounting and control, the levers of financial regulation, constantly told the young manager that the boss should be more Catholic than the Pope himself, and crystal clear. He taught never to make a serious decision without at least 2 options, and with a sum of more than $100 million, it is good to have a third. From him, Lee learned to put all ideas on paper. "You succeed when you act impulsively," he told me. "You are able to sell anyone anything, But in this case, you're talking about spending $100 million. Go home and put your great idea on paper tonight. If you don't succeed, you haven't thought it through yet. It was valuable advice, and Iacocca has sought to follow it ever since. By their very nature, financial analysts are defensive, conservative, pessimistic. On the other side are the sales and marketing guys, people who are aggressive, risk-taking, optimistic. These latter always say let's do it, while the former warn why it shouldn't be done. Any company needs both sides, its own system of checks and balances. When financiers show great weakness, the company is in danger of bankruptcy. But when their influence is excessive, the company will be unable to meet market demand or will be uncompetitive. Keys to the art of management. At the age of 36, Lee Iacocca became general manager of the largest branch of the world's second-largest automobile company. I had to see if the experience I had gained in sales and marketing could be applied to working with people. So I began to develop a management system that I still use today. Over the years, I regularly asked my top performers and required them to in turn ask their top performers as well a few basic questions. What are your goals for the next 3 months? What are your plans, priorities, hopes? What do you intend to do to fulfill them? Every 3 months, each manager sits down at a table next to his or her immediate supervisor to discuss what has been accomplished and set goals for the next quarter. If there is full agreement with the supervisor, the manager puts the results of the meeting in writing, as documenting an idea is the first step to putting it into action. By doing so, you get into specific details and it is much harder to mislead yourself or anyone else. The effectiveness of the quarterly report system first allows a person to be their own boss and set their own goals. Second, makes his work more fruitful and forces him to take initiative. Third, promotes the promotion of new ideas to the top. Fourth, makes managers think and weigh the results of their activities, plans for the coming period, and ways of their realization. People are always on the lookout. You have to report directly to your boss every quarter, and indirectly to his boss and his boss's boss. In this way, good workers do not go unnoticed and, just as importantly, bad workers cannot hide behind the backs of others. Generates a dialogue between the manager and his boss. During these quarterly meetings, the boss is required to express his attitude toward every plan proposed by the manager under him. He may become not so much a supervisor as an advisor and senior coworker. The system also works well when an employee fails to do his job. In this case, the boss usually does not need to say anything, but even then, there is usually room for some constructive solutions. Often the person himself says, "I'm not able to do my job. I can't do it. Could you transfer me to another position?" Every company loses good employees who are simply out of place. They might have been more successful if they had been transferred to a more suitable job. The earlier the nature of the problem is identified, the better the chance of solving it. Under normal circumstances, I don't approve of moving people from one place to another, and I am skeptical of the current fashion of sequentially moving administrators from one department of a company to another, as if all professions were interchangeable. It's like saying of a cardiologist, "He's a great cardiac surgeon. Let him deliver babies next week." I don't believe that a person who has been trained as an accountant is doomed to remain an accountant all his life, regardless of his aptitude for any other profession, but he should be given sufficient time to really master this other profession. Qualities of a good manager: decisiveness. A manager must gather as much information and predictions as possible before making a decision. If you only have 50% of the facts, that is clearly not enough. You have to be very lucky, otherwise there will be huge losses. There are times when this is unavoidable, but it is not a system. At the same time, 100% of the necessary information can never be collected. At some point you have to trust your intuition. Take a risk. If you do not have all the facts in hand, you should rely on your own experience. Holders of master's degrees in business management are wary of intuitive decisions, and they are partly right, but many throw themselves into the other extreme. They believe that any economic problem can be structured and reduced to the analysis of a typical economic situation. This is correct in the classroom, but in practice, in a business environment, someone should say, "Okay, guys, we have talked and it will be done. In an hour we have to get down to business." After all, even the right decision turns out to be wrong if made too late. And there is no such thing as absolute certainty. After the majority of the necessary information has been gathered, there comes a moment when you are at the mercy of the law of diminishing returns. This is why a certain degree of risk is absolutely necessary. Sometimes you have to take a risk and then correct mistakes along the way. To a certain extent, I have always been guided by my gut. I have never been one of those who can sit back and strategize endlessly. Contrary to what the textbooks say, the most important decisions in corporations are made not by collective bodies, not by committees, but by individuals. I have always had a policy of respecting the principles of democracy right up to the point of the final decision. At that point, I became a ruthless boss. Okay, I've listened to everyone, I would say. Now listen to what we are going to do. Knowing how to motivate employees to work hard. The only way to get people energized is to communicate with them. This requires know how to talk. I have known many engineers who had profound ideas, but found it difficult to communicate them clearly to other people. It is embarrassing when a person of great ability is unable to communicate his ideas clearly when speaking before a board or committee. The most common way to connect with employees is to speak not to each one individually, but as a whole group. Public speaking, which is the best way to inspire a large group of people, is fundamentally different from speaking to a person alone. Such a speech requires serious preparation. The speaker may be a well-informed person, but unless he or she has carefully considered what he or she intends to say today and to that particular audience, there is no point in taking up people's time. The audience may not be attentive enough, so start your speech by telling them what you intend to say. Then say exactly that. Finally, repeat what you have already said. Before you finish your speech, impress upon the audience that they have to actually do something. It doesn't matter what it is. Write a letter to your congressman, call your neighbor, or think about a proposal you've made. Don't leave the podium without organizing the audience properly. It is important to speak to people in a language they are familiar with. If you can do that, your listeners will say to themselves, "Gosh, he said exactly what I was thinking." And if they begin to respect you, they will follow you for the rest of their lives. Always use a prepared text. Improvised speech is too tedious. You can sometimes combine a prepared text with digressions from it when the need arises. Second, listening. Many people fail to realize that true communication is a two-way process. To inspire people working for you to work hard and take initiative, you need to listen carefully. You don't have to accept every offer. But if you don't respond to someone who comes in with an offer by exclaiming, "That's a hell of an idea," and patting them on the back, they will never come back to you with another offer. This kind of contact makes people feel like they are really worth something. This is where the difference between a mediocre company and an outstanding company lies. Third, encourage the successful. If employees not only articulate, set goals, and achieve them, they should be rewarded with more than just kind words. The most tangible way a company can recognize an employee's value is through monetary rewards and promotions. When an employee is promoted, it's time to increase his responsibilities and set higher expectations. When he is promoted, you reward him for what he has already done and at the same time encourage him to do more. But never be too hard on him when things are not going well. If he is upset about his own failure, you run the risk of such treatment at all out of his route and deprive him of any desire to improve the case. Be able to work as a team. The surest way to develop an idea in depth is to interact with fellow managers. The interaction of 2 or 3 interlocutors can be extraordinarily fruitful, and it has played a big role in my own success. That's why I advocate that managers spend time talking together, not necessarily in formal meetings, but just on a walk where they can casually give each other useful advice and solve various problems. Everyone knows managers, smart and talented people who never achieve great success. Here we are not talking about those who do not want to move forward, and not about those who are frankly lazy. We are talking about people who are punchy, who followed their life plans, got an education, got a good place, worked hard, but whose career, despite all this, did not work out. These people often complain that they made a false move or got caught by a boss who disliked them. They portray themselves as victims. Luck certainly plays a role, but the main reason that capable people fail in their careers is because they don't interact well with their coworkers. There is a huge difference between a solid self, which is necessary, and an exorbitant self, which can act destructively. In the first case, one knows one's strengths, is confident, has an idea of what one can achieve, and is determined to achieve one's goal. In the second, he is always looking for recognition. He constantly needs to be praised. He thinks of himself as a little higher than anyone else, and he looks down on his subordinates. At the other extreme are managers who are too shy or fearful of dealing with the press, or who do not want anyone to know about their performance at all. A certain degree of self-promotion is natural and even necessary. For senior management positions, I only look for tireless workers who are eager to do more than what is required of them. They are always available to the people they work with and work hard to help them better fulfill their responsibilities. The strength of these managers is that they know how to give assignments to others and how to inspire people to get things done. They know how to identify bottlenecks and prioritize tasks. They are the kind of managers who have the authority to say, "Forget this business. It's going to take 10 years. This is what we have to do today." You don't need many of them. With 25 such young men, I could run the United States government. Chapter 4. At the Chrysler Company. Lee Iacocca joined Chrysler when it was almost bankrupt. It is to that period of time belong the words, "When times are hard, there is no choice but to pull yourself together, get on with your life, and do the best you can." The new manager had to do a gigantic job building a team, reorganizing the entire management, sales, marketing, advertising. They also had to resort to such measures as selling unprofitable plants, laying off employees, cutting salaries, and various benefits. All business operations can ultimately be summarized in 3 words: people, product, profit. People come first. If you don't have a reliable team, little can be accomplished from the other factors. Here, Iacocca had to face something he had never encountered in his decades at Ford, and learn new lessons: layoffs. All of the measures to save the company were given a very hard time, but none were as severe as the mass layoffs. The layoffs applied to all categories of employees, from supervisors to the rank and file. Having experienced layoffs myself, I immediately realized what not to do. First of all, I did not tell those being fired that I did not like them. I invariably tried to explain to them the reasons for the dismissal and gave them the maximum pension allowed by the rules. In some cases, have even broken the rules and inflated it somewhat. Dismissals are always unpleasant and should be done with as much compassion as possible. They made me think more deeply about the social responsibility of the firm's managers, a lesson I had not learned at Ford. Advertising campaign. There were 2 approaches to the question of how to respond to a corporate crisis. For the most part, public relations officers believed that the best policy was to maintain a policy of silence. "We should sit tight," they said. "Everything will work out." The least that should be done is to draw attention to the corporation's disastrous situation. The advertising agency Kennan and Eckhart, however, strongly rejected this position. Since the situation is critical, the corporation faces a choice: either die quietly or die crying out loudly for help. We recommend the second way. In this case, there is still a chance that someone will hear you. Chrysler agreed with their recommendation, developed a program of advertising campaign that would inspire public confidence in its prosperous future. Instead of advertising our products, we began to advertise the company itself and its future. Equality of sacrifice. Lee Iacocca began by reducing his own salary to a symbolic $1 a year. He did this because he needed to share the fate of everyone working in the company, so that when he met with the union president he could look him straight in the eye and say, "This is what I expect from your people as their share of the burden." As a result, he was no longer able to say, "And you son of a bitch, what are you sacrificing?" He did so with a sober, cold calculation and with pragmatic goals in mind. To make the firm's employees and suppliers think, we can follow a man who sets such an example. I learned more about people in my 3 years at Chrysler than I did in my 32 years at Ford. I discovered that people are willing to make great sacrifices if everyone else shares their plight. When hardship falls equally on everyone, mountains can be made. But as soon as it turns out that some are shirking or not pulling their share of the burden, it's all for naught. I call it equal sacrifice. When I started making my sacrifice, I saw others doing what was necessary. And that's the only reason Chrysler Corporation got out of the quagmire. We went through it all. The system worked. It's like magic and awe-inspiring. After cutting my own salary, I then went after the executive staff. We cut the salaries of all but the lowest level of employees. Only the secretaries' salaries were not cut. They deserved every penny they earned. The managers dutifully accepted our decision. They read the newspapers. They understood very well that at any moment the corporation could be finished. In times like these, there's no way around it. There is only one path left, a path that leads to the revitalization of the firm. It started with me, But then the desire to save the company spread to everyone, for the greater good. I could have even asked them to jump out of the window and no one would have objected, as there was a common understanding that everyone was giving their blood equally. Direct communication. During 1980, Iacocca visited literally every plant in the company to speak directly to workers. At mass rallies, he thanked them for sticking together during these tough times. He told them that when things got better, he would try to equalize their wages again with the rates in effect at Ford Motor and General Motors. But it wouldn't happen very quickly. He laid out the whole truth to them in response. Some shouted, hooted, and jeered. Others applauded. All this epitomized the highest form of communication, the chairman of a corporation talking to the rank and file. Anyone could listen to him, and anyone could recognize himself as a participant in the conversation. Chapter 5. Toward a question of the presidency. Lee Iacocca, a child of the Great Depression, has always been an ardent admirer of Roosevelt. Roosevelt did a lot for America. He brought the nation together. He brought the outcasts back to life. He had the courage to take people from the street sidewalks and put them to the real work. But above all, he was a pragmatist. When he faced major problems, he was sure to do something about them. And that always requires more courage than doing nothing. He didn't solve the problems created by the crisis with charts and graphs, or Harvard Business School theories. He took concrete steps. He was always willing to try something new, and when it didn't work, he immediately switched to something else. Although Iacocca never really thought about running for president, all the fuss about it taught him something. The trait that people appreciate about me is that I am a good manager. I can cut production costs, make money, and manage a huge institution. And if I'm a fish out of water anywhere, it's in those areas. I know how to balance a budget with an asset, and I have a track record of bringing a failing company back to life. People obviously yearn for a leader who can balance the budget and restore the country's resolve to achieve its goals, who tells them the truth, namely that America is not a bad country at all, that it is a great country, or at least that it can be made great again if we just get back on the right track. Conclusion. A few conclusions important not only for those pursuing a management career, but for anyone interested in personal effectiveness issues. To succeed in school, business, and other areas, you need to be able to prioritize things and manage your time. Mistakes are an integral part of our lives, and it is impossible to avoid them completely. Put your idea on paper. If you fail, it means you haven't thought it through. A serious decision should have at least two options. You will never have 100% of the information you need to make the right decision. At some point you have to take a risk. The only way to energize people is to communicate with them. A successful manager must be able to talk, listen, and work as a team. All business operations can be reduced to three factors: people, product, profit. People come first. If you don't have a reliable team, little will be accomplished from the other factors. People say to me, "You've had brilliant success. How did you do it?" And I repeat what my parents taught me. Set a goal for yourself. Get as much education as you can. But then, for God's sake, do something. Don't wait for something to happen on its own. It's not easy, but if you work hard, you'll be amazed at how you can achieve anything you set your mind to. Thank you all for listening to the end. If you liked it, don't forget to rate and subscribe to the channel. You can buy the full version of the book at the link in the description.